The structure of modern economies was adopted during the signing of the Peace of Westphalia in 1648 that established the blueprint for countries and their borders. Since then, economies have been structured with central governments that collect taxes, allocate funds, and spend money, and central banks that print money and set interest rates for aggregate supply and aggregate demand to intercept at equilibrium. The main drivers in an economy are productivity growth, the short-term debt cycle, and the long-term debt cycle. The medium behind these drivers are transactions that are initiated by individuals who have needs and wants which entice them to engage in the transfer of money or credit for goods or services. The short-term debt cycle transpires between 5 to 8 years. When central banks lower interest rates or loosen monetary policy, the economy expands and productivity rises. When the economy begins to reach its maximum production capacity, it starts to overheat. Central banks then increase interest rates and the cycle will begin anew. If monetary policy continues to be loosened as the economy overheats, inflation will rise because aggregate demand will outpace aggregate supply. Over the long term, short-term debt cycles aggregate to a long-term debt cycle. In the first phase, debt is used to finance investments. These investments are productive, which lead disposable income to grow at a higher rate than debt volume. In phase 2, the rate at which the volume of debt grows accelerates and overtakes disposable income growth. In the third phase, the rate at which the volume of debt rises accelerates again and new questionable borrowers enter the market lured by the opportunity to get rich fast. In phase 4, usually at the end of the short-term debt cycle, central banks start to increase interest rates to stop the economy from overheating and to bring aggregate supply and aggregate demand to equilibrium. When interest rates rise, there is economic shock because large number of borrowers have borrowed too much. As a result, defaults begin to occur in the economy and then can evolve into a recession. This was the cycle that led to the 2007 recession in the United States and Japan in the 1990s. Over the long term, the most important factor is productivity growth because it's sustainable, while credit creates cycles which may lead to economic shocks. Living standards increase as a function of productivity. If citizens become more productive, purchasing power increases, which increases living standards. Productivity growth also keeps inflationary environments under control. To determine how much a country can produce or how fast it may grow, we can look at productivity as the mechanical function of the number of workers to how much output a worker can produce. The number of citizens in an economy who can work can be affected by many factors including age, lack of knowledge, sex, or other factors depending on the country. In many countries, for example, women have employment restrictions. These restrictions can impede the flow of capital to where it can be most productive or innovative. Some of the major barriers that can get in the way of productivity includes corruption, lack of development of capital and debt markets, lack of investments, lack of innovation, negative attitudes toward work, lack of adequate laws, limited raw materials, and the cost of education. When economies mature, productivity rate decreases while the cost of labor increases. As a result, mature economies lose their competitive advantage to economies that are developing because technological advances from developed economies are used to increase the productivity rate of developing economies. As a result, those emerging economies attract capital and investments that would have otherwise gone to mature economies. When economies mature, citizens tend to work less hours than those in developing economies. They work less hours because they have higher incomes. At the same time, citizens spend more time enjoying the fruits of their success. This leads mature economies to borrow more aggressively, since there is less money coming from taxes. As a result, public debt increases. If public debt increases so much that it cannot be serviced, the central bank will print money which will devalue the currency. The economy at that stage will start to decline.